Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode is sponsored by Hospice Navigation Services. When you need information about hospice, Hospice Navigation Services is here to help. An expert navigator will answer your questions about end-of-life care and give you the tools to feel confident in your decisions. A hospice navigation session is a great way to troubleshoot your current hospice care. It's your journey. We can be your guide. Visit hospicenavigation.com to schedule your hospice navigation session today.
I'm talking with end-of-life doula Elizabeth Johnson today about the work of the Peaceful Presence Project and caring for those who are unhoused at the end of life. Elizabeth Johnson is the co-founder and executive director of the Peaceful Presence Project, a community-based organization in Oregon dedicated to fostering compassionate end-of-life care. Elizabeth serves on the Leadership Council of Public Health Palliative Care International and is a board member of the Central Oregon Council on Aging. She's also a former member of the board of directors for the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, which is also known as NEDA. She's traveled extensively as an educator and a facilitator, cultivating a deep interest in the cultural and social frameworks that shape human experiences of illness, grief, and death. She's deeply committed to advancing death and grief literacy within local communities, promoting honest and transformative dialogue around the complexities of dying and bereavement. Elizabeth and I had a great conversation. She shared some personal experiences that in her life propelled her toward a career as a death doula, including the death of her infant son and working with people in India who had serious illness. Elizabeth and I discussed some of the typical myths that people believe about palliative care and also talked about the work of the Peaceful Presence Project. They are working to serve people who are experiencing homelessness, assisting with completion of advanced directives. Elizabeth shares some experiences of her work with the unhoused population, helping them with their advanced care planning, and she also shared her hopes for palliative care in the future. You can find Elizabeth and the work that her organization is doing at peacefulpresenceproject.org. They have a lot of courses and resources there for you to access, so I hope you enjoy this conversation with Elizabeth Johnson of the Peaceful Presence Project. There's a lot to learn. Elizabeth, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm so glad to have you with me today.
I'm happy to be here with you as well. Thank you, Helen.
We're going to have a little fun, well, what we would consider fun, before we get started into our deep dive and our more intense conversation. We're going to have an icebreaker question that I didn't send to you because I like to kind of surprise my guests. But I wanted to relate back to end-of-life care and advanced care planning. So here's your question. Share something, or would you share something from your advanced care plan with me and my listeners?
That's a great question. I have included in my advance directive information about if I were to have a medical emergency and decisions had to be made quickly, who I actually would and would not want in the space with me.
Oh,
Including family that I really would want close in the emergency room or could, access me in different environments, and people that I would find, a little bit more challenging or difficult to have in the mix.
I hear what you're saying. The words you're not saying. We don't want to say annoying or irritating, but maybe people who don't have as productive a presence or positive energy inside a situation like that. That's really good. I think that advanced care planning for a lot of people, I know for me, when I think about end of life, I'm like hospice and music and whether somebody would be sitting vigil with me, things like that. But circumstances being what they are, sometimes an acute event happens, something very quickly. So it's good to have a contingency plan for something like that as well. I'm glad you have that answer. That's not something we really talked about on the show before. I don't think I had another guest answer that. That's great.
And it comes from, we as an organization have created an end-of-life planning guidebook that we call End Notes. And in there, we have a series of questions that people might think about when it comes to, if you were to have a more ideal environment for your end-of-life experience, what would it look like? But through that process, I realized in a medical emergency, some of those more spacious, expansive, home-based considerations also might apply to an emergency environment like the emergency room. And there are some people that I think would just complicate the scenario a bit. And so I felt it was helpful to detail that out for loved ones and providers.
We have a tendency to plan for that good death. The extended, here's where I want to die. And the scenarios don't always happen that way. Situations occur that there are car accidents and heart attacks and strokes, and, you're not, outside on the beach, and you're not in your home, things like that. You're in the emergency room or in the ICU.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we're going to dig in. All right, you have a degree in community and urban planning. I'm not even going to ask what that is. I'm not smart enough to know what that is, but I do know what an end-of-life doula is. And that's also who you are, part of your identity. What led you to work as an end-of-life doula?
It's a great question. I guess I would take multiple steps back into the past and say, one of the initial experiences that sort of turned my gaze towards end-of-life care. When I was 21, I took a one-way flight to India. This was back in the day, ahead of cell phones, ahead of internet, and volunteered and worked with the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta, in a place called Premdan and Kalighat, which were really basic environments, like hospices, that we were working with people who had been essentially dying on the street without care, and were doing very basic interventions to care for people, as in washing bodies, feeding them nutritious food when they wanted to eat, and more than anything, just sitting alongside of and being with people as they died. And that really, for me, sparked this real interest in what does it look like to do that work for one another, especially in those non-medical spaces. And I had the benefit of living and working internationally in India and Central and South America, and really sparked for me this recognition that we all do not treat death and dying the same. And, in my own culture, realizing and feeling into that pretty profound absence of a lot of those cultural rites and rituals and containers that help us to navigate those experiences of death and dying and grief. Whether it was the Dia de los Muertos in Central and South America, seeing people go to the the cemetery and be together with family and storytell and remember ancestors. Being in India and seeing people, after they died, moving a body through the streets of a neighborhood so that people could witness that somebody had died, and then having these open funeral pyres and having people, in a very raw way, see death and dying in front of them. And so it just made me question what are the differences for my circles in my own culture, because of the lack of exposure, the lack of containers to know how to have these conversations, to really look towards death and dying. In 2010, I was pregnant and went through a full-term pregnancy, very healthy, absolutely no emergencies connected to the experience, and went into labor. It was a long labor, and my son had a true knot in his umbilical cord. And so he was born with a lot of complications. He was breathing, but having issues with the heart and other things. And my ex-partner and I were forced to make the really difficult decision of taking him off life support the day after he died. And for me, it really thrust me into this very direct experience with death and dying, and this realization that I was embedded within a world and a community where maybe 10 to 15% of people knew how to meet me in that space, and the majority of people did not know how to meet me in that space. I had no conversations about what end-of-life planning for my son might look like if he were to die. I had no preparation mindset around the experience. And it ended up being, in a lot of ways, exactly what I would not choose for myself, and I would not choose for my son. And so with my master's in community planning, urban development, sort of systems thinking, what emerged was this, this question of how do we cultivate different end-of-life experiences within community? What do people need to learn? What sort of access to information or sort of practical wisdom might be helpful in order to help communities orient towards and be available to one another differently around end-of-life experiences. And so that, for me, at that point, it was in 2010. In 2000, when I lost my son in 2012, I did my first end-of-life doula training. And then from that point forward, started to weave in a whole diversity of end-of-life learning experiences, to the point where in 2019, I helped co-found our nonprofit, the Peaceful Presence Project. And working as end-of-life doulas is one of the areas of support that we offer up in our community and in our state and across the country.
Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. So I want to touch back on a couple of things that you said. So the holy religious order that you worked with in Calcutta, that was Mother Teresa's order, if that's the right word. That's her organization, wasn't it?
It was, yes. It was with Mother Teresa's sisters that I worked alongside of at Kalighat and Premdan. Yes.
Oh. I'm so struck by the cultural differences where you're talking about they take the body and they walk it through in the neighborhood so that people witness it. It's such a clash against what we do in American society. If a resident dies inside a long-term care facility, they take them out the back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't go out the front door.
No, you kind of try to tuck it away and hide it because it will probably be disconcerting or uncomfortable for people in general, right? So you make it go out the back versus the front into the open light.
Yeah. So it's like Miss Jones just disappeared.
Right.
Even though everybody knew she died.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. So the Peaceful Presence Project, you guys are doing some amazing stuff. You have some amazing people working with you, some of the folks we love the best. What is the mission at the Peaceful Presence Project?
So our mission is really about reimagining and transforming the way that communities talk about. So where and how are we normalizing conversations around death and dying? We refer to that as death and grief literacy. So how communities talk about, plan for. So, right, what exposure opportunities do people have in this upstream way to really articulate to loved ones, to providers, to anybody who should know, this is who I am, and this is what I would want in the case of a medical emergency and or a diagnosis, and to be a scary diagnosis, to say, this is the dying experience most reflective of me. And then finally, the experiences, reimagining the experiences that people have at end of life, and through end of life into that bereavement window. So our work is founded upon something referred to as public health palliative care, which really works to kind of widen the aperture of who's involved in the dying process, and to really bring it back into the community, really encouraging a more dynamic conversation between, the health system, local government, education, universities, community, faith communities, and really giving everyone a different way to be involved in the death and dying process with and for one another.
I love it that you guys are focusing on this, because palliative care, despite the fact that it's been around for 20 years or almost 20 years, is sort of this unknown when it comes to healthcare. Even a lot of healthcare workers don't know what it is, because we're so siloed, right, in our own different spaces. What do you find in your work to be the biggest misconception that people have about palliative care?
I think there's multiple things. One, there is this misconception that palliative care is only for people who are dying. And the reality is palliative care is really for anyone living with a serious illness, right? Any stage of illness, of serious illness, and that it can actually be provided alongside of curative treatment. A lot of people, equate the P word, palliative care, with the H word, hospice. And the reality is it's simply not the same thing, right? That hospice is really specifically for people nearing the end of life, usually when curative treatment is no longer pursued and the life expectancy is around that 6 months or less. Palliative care ideally begins much earlier. And then, this idea, again, of kind of connected to the hospice sense of, that palliative care is giving up, that it means you simply just go to sort of like that symptom management pain. It's about a lot of pain meds. And the reality is it's much more dynamic. It involves hopefully spiritual care, counseling, kind of widening the eyes we have on the family, the caregivers, and the person with the illness, and saying what is needed here and how do you define quality of life, so that we can kind of walk alongside of you as this illness does whatever this illness is going to do. And then the other thing I would say is that I think there's this misconception that palliative care is just clinical in nature, or that it only happens in clinical settings. And this is really what a lot about what our work is rooted in, is this question of how do we palliate suffering, and this recognition that palliative care can happen in community-based settings, right? There's this research that says that typically around 80% of needs for those navigating a serious or terminal illness are psychosocial in nature. And so the recognition connected to that is really that we can palliate a lot of those needs within more social and relational spheres. And so I think that's a big piece that we're trying to, kind of challenge or remind individuals in that palliative care space is it is both about that clinical as well as the relational, social, community-based realities for a person.
Yeah, I have found the same thing, that a lot of people are unaware that palliative care can be community-based. It doesn't have to be hospital-based or facility-based. Yes. Unfortunately, access to community-based hospice is not as widespread and as easy to tap into as we would like, but I think that's changing. But I think the reason palliative care gets a bad rap is because it's associated with hospice, right? Because it's affiliated. Hospice always includes palliative care, but not all palliative care is hospice. And that's just really a hard concept for people. And you'd think after 20 years we would catch on, but we're still learning, still having the same conversations. So let's talk about the community-based efforts that you guys are working with. One thing that is near and dear to your heart and very central to your work is working with the unhoused, homeless folks who are living on the streets or in shelters, and doing advanced care planning with them, because there are hospice agencies, there are palliative care community-based programs that are providing care for people who are unhoused, and that is part of the programs that the program that Peaceful Presence Project provides. So when you talk about working with someone who's unhoused to do advanced care planning, right? Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges that you see when it comes to doing that planning with them?
Yeah. Well, I would even, before I even go into that, Helen, I would say that, I think some of the things we have learned in the process of doing advanced care planning with this particular population, one, the mortality rates for individuals experiencing homelessness are 3 to 4 times greater than the US population. And the average life expectancy is typically about 12 years less than the general US population. And the health of older adults who are not housed, who are typically age 50 or older, research shows is comparable to the general elderly population aged about 70 or older. So you've got all of these really challenging baseline realities, playing out for this particular demographic. And advanced care planning services remain mostly inaccessible for this population. And so unto itself, right, there are some baseline challenges that we inherently confront. Care for this demographic tends to be really fragmented. So when you look at the opportunities to sort of flag, hey, there's a need for, completing an advanced directive in this scenario, it just frequently does not happen. We, as a nonprofit, received some grant funding to do advanced care planning outreach to individuals experiencing homelessness. And in order to do this, really part of the success of the initiative was that we had to go out and find people where they were. So I would partner up with different local service providers. There's a group called Mosaic Medical that works mostly with low-income and unhoused community members in our region. They have a mobile van that would go out to various encampments, different places where people were, living in tents or trailers out on the edge of town. I would go and set up my table and my materials and start to just develop relationships with people. They'd come in to see the doctor or come and pick up some water. And I would just start to, initiate conversations around, hey, have you ever completed an advanced directive? The thing I heard over and over again was, yeah, I've been handed that piece of paper about 10 times. And I leave the office and I put it in the garbage because I don't know how to do this. It takes a certain literacy to understand what those questions even mean. And so we found, we, with this initiative, actually completed about 185 advanced directives with individuals experiencing homelessness. And it worked because it was relational. We worked to build up this trust, and it was facilitated. We sat alongside of somebody and we went through the process of completing the advanced directive. And there was a lot that came up for people in the process. There was a lot of sharing about how they had felt unsupported by the health system, all of the challenges of just not being seen or trusted in terms of what was happening for them, and feeling like they were given very few opportunities to really be advocated for or to advocate for themselves. So, I think, and then Helen, the other thing I think is that, for the general public, when somebody does that, they turn 65, they do that wellness exam with their provider. That's when, oftentimes somebody will say, hey, do you have an advanced directive? Let's make this a priority. The individuals experiencing homelessness really need to oftentimes be doing an advanced directive much earlier because life expectancy is lower. The prevalence of comorbidities is much higher. And, oftentimes somebody goes into the ER and there is no one to turn to say, what would this person want? And so we heard feedback over and over again from service providers who were working with this population. I went into the ER with so-and-so, and the experience was so different. Having an advanced directive on hand, we were able to reach out to this person's daughter who lived in Idaho. She was given peace of mind that the care given to her father was actually in alignment with what he wanted, et cetera. So a lot of really, I think, great benefits and a lot of learnings that have come out of this work.
I can imagine the dynamics of relationships with the population that is unhoused, especially if they have been in that population for years. Their relationships are fragmented, really hard to pin down a medical power of attorney. Is that one of the issues that they struggle with the most, is who's going to be a decision maker?
Absolutely. That was the hardest point over and over again. I'd say more often than not, people have a very clear sense of this is what I do or I do not want in terms of care. But when we would get to that durable power of attorney for healthcare, the healthcare representative question, I would say around 60 to 70% of people said, there is not a person that I trust enough to put in this role. And that was really, difficult and heartbreaking. And also, I think because it was a facilitated process, oftentimes we could tease it out a bit and really follow some threads. And at the end of the conversation, there was this realization, oh, I was thinking it had to be my father, my sister, my, so-and-so. The reality was a lot of times people would say, oh, okay, I want my, next door neighbor, tent mate, John, to be that person because he knows me better than anybody else. And I actually trust that he would advocate for me and knows me more than the majority of my family does. There's a lot of estrangement, a lot of fear of, I need to do an advance directive because I don't want my mother to step in to make the decisions because we don't talk anymore. But there oftentimes was that challenge of, well, who is that person who can do that for me?
Yeah. I think that's challenging in any given situation for anybody that's doing an advance directive.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, especially in this particular situation. This conversation is so good, but we're going to take a quick break. Hang on for more great content.
This episode is sponsored by Hospice Navigation Services.
If you or someone you care about is dealing with a life-limiting illness, you need a guide. Hospice Navigation Services is here to help you get the best end-of-life care possible. We understand the importance of personalized, experienced support. Hospice navigators provide one-on-one support over the phone or through video calls to guide you every step of the way. They'll answer your questions, explain what hospice care looks like, and give you the tools to feel confident in your decisions. Whether you're planning ahead or you have an urgent need, Hospice Navigation Services helps you and your family understand your options for end-of-life care. A hospice navigation session is a great way to troubleshoot your current hospice care and get answers to your questions. You don't have to go through this alone. You deserve compassionate support and guidance for your end-of-life experience. Hospice Navigation Services can be your guide. To book your hospice navigation session and receive your free guide to end-of-life care, visit our website at hospicenavigation.com. It's your journey. Hospice Navigation Services can be your guide. When it comes to this, you do a lot of facilitating, a lot of counseling and guidance. What guidance would you offer to families who have someone who's unhoused, a loved one who's in the wind, for lack of a better term, but who might be living with a life-limiting illness? What guidance would you give families who are dealing with this?
Well, I'd start with the caveat that I do not by any means consider myself an expert in this realm. The learnings that we have added up in this process have been over the last, 3 to 4 years. But I would say oftentimes what I find myself saying to family, one, is that, we need to really be clear-eyed about this and see that the system often fails individuals experiencing homelessness, especially at the end of life. And so if you as a family member are involved in whatever that looks like, it's really important to ask that question of what does it look like to really advocate for dignity conserving care for this loved one? Meaning, what is required in order to really respect the autonomy and the self-determination of this person, right? And oftentimes they may make choices that are really hard to understand. I sat alongside of a lot of people and they would say things like, I will not go in and receive care if it means that I will be separated from my dog. My dog is my family, and if I have to go in the ER, I simply will not do it. Right? So what does that mean, right? And because autonomy is core to dignity and especially at the end of life. And so really seeking to learn and to respect what that means for your particular loved one. I'd say too, it's really important when possible to get them connected to local resources, and where that support comes from might really be different than the general public. So, are there street medicine teams or maybe mobile palliative care units that are going out into encampments? Where is this person living? Some hospice organizations are really open to working with unhoused populations. Sometimes a challenge around that can be, is morphine being given? And if so, can it be locked up? Is it being accessed by others, right? What sort of living environment is this person? And is it safe for hospice professionals to go out and see that person? And that can be a real challenge. And then kind of thinking out of the box, right? What other community networks are in place that might be helpful? Maybe some faith-based outreach teams or different social workers that really are willing to get involved and advocate. And then again, just thinking about that safe location piece, right? Where are there shelters or respite beds or tiny home communities that might be opportunities to get your loved one housed in order to receive the care that they need? And then, what other conditions are really important? I want my cat with me. I want my dog with me. I want my street family to be able to access me. So all of those things being, I think, really key, and recognizing that you may have to think out of the box when it comes to really getting quality, dignity, conserving care. And then remembering as family, you're affected as well. You are not separate from the impact of oftentimes a really heartbreaking reality. And so just reminding people to make sure you're accessing that support to, the grief that will oftentimes emerge from witnessing the challenges of such care settings.
Yeah. Grief is messy on a good day. We know that. So having the complication of having a family member who is unhoused and trying to navigate all of that, I can imagine that can create some really prolonged or complicated grief. So tell me about a time when you worked with someone who was unhoused, where it went well and why it went well.
Well, I was sitting with a gentleman who knew he had a combination of comorbidities and had been in and out of the emergency room over and over again. And as we sat together, he paused and he looked over at me and he said, nobody's ever asked me how these experiences were for me. I've never been given the experience to talk about how painful it's been and how concerned I am for my children, that this has had a profound impact on their well-being, because they're constantly worrying about me, yet they live elsewhere. And I want them to know that by doing this advanced directive, I feel more confident that when I do, when I am brought to the emergency room and I do die, that it'll be more in alignment with who I am and what I want. And I just remember feeling, sort of this, like, it stayed with me all day. I kept feeling him. I kept seeing his face. And about a week later, one of the local service providers who works as a case manager with the unhoused population, she reached out to me and she said, Elizabeth, I just want you to know so-and-so actually went down with a heart attack, was brought to the hospital by EMS. And we were able to call his daughter and his son, his family who were not in the area, and say that everything your father put in the advance directive was possible. He did receive the type of care that he wanted, and that we as case managers were able to provide him with, we were there holding his hand. He was conscious for some of the time he was in the hospital. He opened his eyes and he asked us questions, and we said, don't worry, we're here with you and you're getting the exact experience that you asked for. And so I could feel the reverberations of it. Wasn't just about him doing the advance directive. It brought a different level of peace to his children. It brought a different level of peace and perspective to the case managers that, oftentimes we're left questioning, are we doing what this person would want? So yeah, it's to this day that story and that individual and that case really stay with me.
I love that. As providers, we experience so much moral fatigue because we know a lot of times the care we're providing, or the care we have to provide legally, ethically, doesn't necessarily align with what the person wanted.
Absolutely.
And then that adds to our compassion fatigue, our secondary grief, et cetera. And it just feeds into our burnout, frankly, making us discontent with the work that we do. But it's so nice to hear a story that's a success story is what you would call it. He got the care he wanted. He supported his kids through the providers that were communicating with them. There's so much meaning in that. And I can tell from the way you tell the story that you find meaning in it as well to keep you going every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot that's heartbreaking about sitting alongside of somebody and hearing the ways in which the system has failed them over and over and over again. And yet to be able to condense or distill those experiences into an advance directive that by no means is perfect. And there are a lot of cases where somebody does an advance directive and it doesn't protect them in the ways that they would want. But there is something about the process of listening to the stories, being present in that way. I mean, oftentimes it will take 2 hours to do an advance directive because there's so much that comes with it, right? It's not just a technical document. It's a life well-lived and not well-lived that feels really important for people to reflect upon and share. And there is something really meaningful about at the end of all of that, feeling like we've come a little bit closer to the potential for somebody to have the end of life experience that they specifically would want, and otherwise the system would be unaware of what that would look like.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the whole process of advanced care plan, advanced directive documents? It's really about storytelling because yes, we're talking about treatments and processes and an industry, but what we're really applying all that to is a human being and experiences and needs and wishes and wants and relationships and stories and legacy. And those things are really oil and water. They don't mix well. But I do think that advanced care planning is so difficult because it really is about storytelling. We say end of life wishes, but we're putting it on a legal document. Those things don't mix well. I know that I have had challenges working on my advance directive. So in all honesty, I am the poster child for people that say, do as I say, not as I do. I absolutely believe in the power and the good sense of having an advance directive and doing your advanced care planning. I, however, have not completed mine because when I have attempted to start it, and I have numerous systems that people have sent me, colleagues and coworkers, it becomes very emotional.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And who are you going to make mad? Who do you want there? And it begins to feel heavy and very sad and very emotional. And so I at times have I feel pretty healthy. I'm just going to leave this off for now. So I understand why these advanced directives are so hard to get into place. Yeah. And then you mix dynamics, lifelong dynamics between people and the unhoused population and all that comes with that. How could you possibly even hope to get the advanced care plan done?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that it takes time, that I would oftentimes, I could think of multiple individuals where I probably saw them over a window of 3, 4, 5 months before they actually got to the point of saying, yeah, I'll sit down and actually go through this document with you. And that process unto itself was lengthy, like I said, an hour and a half or 2 hours. It was not a checkbox experience. It was dynamic. It was filled with storytelling. It was filled with a lot of questions. It was, I don't understand what this question actually means. There was a lot of emotion to it. There was a lot of emoting and tears and, memories of my mother died in this way, and this is exactly what I would not want. My father died in this way, and this is what I would want. And so again, I think for all of us, not just individuals experiencing homelessness, for all of us, I think in some ways to sit down and actually do it has to have these other elements of whether it's facilitated or whether we give ourselves the challenge of, okay, over the next year, I will really complete this. And these are my accountability buddies in this process, or, whatever it takes to really commit yourself to an uncomfortable experience in the process that most of us do not choose to do.
You use the word facilitate, but what I hear you saying is listening and guiding. Yeah, so important, so important. Where would you like to see palliative and end-of-life care in 10 years? Where would you like to see us be?
It's a great question. In 10 years, I really would love to see palliative and end-of-life care fully integrated into the fabric of every community, whether that's an urban community, whether that's a rural or frontier community, and have it not be something that is just reserved for the few, but really is considered to be a very normal, standard, and culturally attuned component of healthcare and social care, and really prioritizes, equity at the center of things, whether it's, around housing status, immigration status, race, the geography of where I live, how much money I make, that it is something that is not just a privilege, but really is a human right for all of us. And then I think really, wanting palliative care models to encompass the public health driven approach, which our work is really founded upon, meaning that there's really this proliferation of community-based networks of support, around the palliation of suffering, right? That in every neighborhood, there's trained community members and volunteers, faith leaders, and end-of-life doulas who really are grief literate, right? Death aware, and part of this coordinated circle of care. So again, going back to my initial point, that there is this more dynamic conversation between health system, that general and specialist palliative care support that can be offered, and that there's a bridge between that and the community. And I think that into itself will make the experience and the receiving of palliative care much more accessible, more relational, and more that hopefully all of us are able to really benefit from.
Beautifully said. I love that. What gives you joy in this work? What keeps you coming back to it day after day?
I think it's the potential and the really innovative edge that we oftentimes get to work in. There's a lot that's right about what we're doing as a culture and as systems, and there's a lot that also needs to be done. And I think for me, with my background in urban planning, community development, I see things through the lens of sort of the intersection of these various sectors and circles and communities that I think have the potential to come together differently, more creatively, more consistently, and training people to the end-of-life doula skill set, really working to embed more death and grief literacy within communities is just exciting to me. I think that there's just a lot that will emerge from doing this work. I haven't come up against a limit that makes me feel like it's not worth doing this. And so I love being a part of something that feels like it wants to invite a different way of being with one another around these experiences of death and dying and grief. These are things that will and do touch all of us. And so I think it's a worthwhile process and conversation and experience to return to over and over again. The question of how can we do this better and differently.
I absolutely love that. So tell me about the Peaceful Presence Project. What's going on there, and how can my listeners connect in with the work that's being done?
Yeah. So the nonprofit, we are based here in Oregon, but in a lot of ways we do work across the country. We talk about our work within three main areas of programming. One, education. And in that, we have our end-of-life doula training. It's a 75-hour training. It's available both in a self-paced format as well as a facilitated, but everything's online and all that information's on the website. We also do clinician trainings. Right now, we're offering up an LNEC training, End of Life Nursing Education Consortium, that we are looking to especially collaborate with rural health systems that want more access to this end of life education for their providers and clinicians to take advanced care planning work. And we've developed, like I said earlier, our EndNotes guidebook, which really invites a lot more of these, I think, dynamic conversations around end of life preferences. And then we work as end of life doulas. We have a team of about 24 doulas here in Central Oregon, another team of 5 over in the Portland region here in Oregon. And then, one thing we're really focused on, Helen, is the development of something we're referring to as the Oregon Network for Community-Based Serious Illness Support. So looking at, for example, here in Oregon, 26 of our 36 counties are rural or frontier. There's a lot of spaces where people are simply not receiving quality hospice or palliative care. And so looking to train a diversity of community health workers, community leaders, community volunteers that want access to this end-of-life care education to be available in a diversity of settings across the state, and working to really build up this network or this web of support across our 36 counties, peer-to-peer support, best practice learning, et cetera. And so that's something that we're in the midst of building, ideally with the option of it being something that inspires, and maybe elements of it are replicable in other states across the country.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So peacefulpresenceproject.org, right?
Yes. Yep. That is the website.
Elizabeth, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing all the work that you're doing. Your heart shines through when you talk about your work, and it renews my enthusiasm for the work that I do. And I'm sure all my listeners that are end-of-life workers are having the same kind of vibe from you. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Helen. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.